Here it is, fellas. Tastes fishy. This is the one single most important bait. A little salty. That is put me in the Bassmaster Classic this year. I have probably caught more bass on these than Dean Rojas himself. This is the Dean Rojas Fighting Frog made by Big Bite Bait Company. As for the 4-inch model, I won a Southern Divisional tournament on Barren River Lake throwing this. I went to the Southern Division this year, Florida's Lake Okeechobee. Made my way to the National Championships by flipping grass with this bait. And at the National Championship, 90% of my weigh-in fish came off of this bait, flipping lay down trees. The way I like to rig up my bait is the first thing I put on is a bobber stop to keep my sinker from moving around. If you're fishing heavy cover, you do not want your weight to separate from your bait. You always want to peg it. These are Bass Pro Shops pegs. They're really cheap. Stick your line through the metal wire and you slide the rubber right over your line. Eco Pro Tungsten worm weights. If you fish really heavy grass, you want to go with the lightest weight you can get by with. You don't want to go heavier. Whatever will get the job done, get down through the grass, that's the one you want to go with. For flipping bushes and stuff like that, if the water is less than 2 feet deep, I'm going to use a 5/16 ounce weight because I don't need that real heavy weight if it's only falling 2 feet. If it's more than 2 feet deep, 2 on up, I'm going to usually use a 3/8 ounce sinker, a little bit heavier weight so it drops faster and gets down to the base of that bush. I'm always going to use real heavy line. I use 65-pound braided Gamma fishing line because you're not going to get fish out of that heavy grass or heavy cover without it. If you're fishing just lay down, you can go with lighter line. But with the heavier line, you're going to need a super line hook. I like to use a 4-rod Gamakatsu super line offset worm hook. That way that hook is not going to bend on you while you're fishing it. Now when I rig up my Big Bite Bait Company Fighting Frog, the first thing you want to do is you want to put your bobber stop on there. This one's red. The Bass Pro Shops ones come with black, red, and yellow. I'm out of the black ones in here right now. I'm just showing the red one for an example. I don't like using the yellow. I prefer the black to match my weight, but I will also use the red one. All you gotta do is slide that line right there through the circle that's made in the wire. And after you get that through there, all you do is you pull that rubber stop over your line and it'll pop off right on your line. It'll put a cramp in your line, just cut that off later. After you get your bobber stop on, put on your worm weight. As you can see, that keeps that weight from moving any further up your line. So once you get your hook on there, your weight and your bait will all stay together. Now this is that knot I was telling you guys about before. You go through the back side, form a loop, wrap it around your main line, and inside that loop you formed about 8 times from the bottom to the top. Pull it tight. Slide your bobber stop down onto that weight, and now your stuff is together. When you throw this into a bush, grass, or whatever, your weight is going to stay with your bait at all times. Now if you didn't have that and your weight could slide freely, your bait could snag up in a bush or under the grass, and your weight could sink to the bottom. It'll be down here at the bottom, and your lure's up here in the bush or grass, and you think you're fishing and you're not, because the fish are not seeing your bait. Always, always, always peg your sinker when you're fishing heavy cover. Get my bait on, stick it in about down to the bend of the hook, come out the bottom, slide your bait up, turn that hook. This thing has got a good slot in it, so there ain't a ton of plastic for you to drive that hook home. And then you can skin hook it, and it's also got a little tiny slot in the top. It'll take very little for you to set that hook for that to go through that plastic and stick it into a fish. Make sure you guys always trim your tag line off there. And that is ready to go. Alright, the rod and reel I like to use for the flipping bait is a St. Croix Legend Tournament Bass Slopping Frog. This is a 7'4" heavy fast action rod, and I pair it up with an Abu Garcia Revo STX 6.4 to 1 gear ratio. A rule of thumb with gear ratios is the higher the gear ratio is, the more line it's going to take up per one turn of the handle. So think of it this way: if you got a 5.4 to 1 gear ratio, a 3-pound bass is going to feel a lot smaller than if we're using a 7 to 1 gear ratio, because the higher the gear ratio is, the less winching power you have. But the higher the gear ratio is, the more line you can take up a lot faster. So if you're throwing something that's got slack in the line, like you're flipping and a bait slams it on a slack line, you can take up that slack really fast on a higher gear ratio and drive the hook home. I also like using the St. Croix Mojo Slopping Frog Rod. Like I said, the Legend Tournament Bass is a 7'4". The Mojo is a 7 foot. They're both Slopping Frog rods. One's just a little bit shorter for a little bit more accuracy. But they're both heavy, fast action rods, and they will get the job done. They will horse that fish out of heavy grass, heavy bushes, whatever heavy cover you're fishing. And like I said, I use heavy braid for the real heavy grass and stuff. But if I'm just fishing lay down trees that doesn't have a ton of limbs and everything to get tangled up in and get a fish out of, I'm just going to stick to my 16-pound Gamma fluorocarbon edge. When I fished the national championship on Lake Wheeler, I was fishing mainly lay down trees. I used my Gamma, and I caught a ton of fish, and I didn't break not one fish off all day long. Had I been fishing some lot heavier cover, dense cover, I would have been flipping a braid. This spring, get you guys some D. Rojas Fighting Frogs by Big Bite Bait Company. Rig it up like I said. Get out there and flip some bushes, flip some grass. You're going to catch a ton of fish on these. I guarantee it. I've won a lot of money with it, and it's put me into the Bassmaster Classic.